Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome back to my Final Fantasy XIV Retrospect series. This year, Realm Reborn turns 10, and that means I get to be Old Man Haps. I go, back in my day, 10 years ago, we had X and Y and Z. And I figured if I'm going to do that anyway, I might as well make a few video series on it. We've been looking at some of the old jobs and also some of the old patches to see when some of the most major features were added to the game, and compare it to the kind of content patches we get nowadays, just to see how things change or have stacked up. Now, in our first video, we took a look at patch 2.0, which we didn't dive too deep into as it was just the re-release of A Realm Reborn, a miracle in and of itself, and patch 2.1, A Realm Awoken. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at just patch 2.2 through the Maelstrom to see what was added in that patch. So first of all, it goes without saying, oh, it had MSQ. I don't know why I'm even going to say that throughout most of this series, especially given that the patch 2.1 through 2.3 MSQ was a little bit only okay. It's better in retrospect, ironically, than it was at the time. However, the patch 2.2 MSQ did have one major point that ended up being really important. It acted as kind of a preview and a tease to things we would be getting in later patches. A teaser of Rogue and Ninja, which would be added in patch 2.4. Don't worry, we'll still mention that when the video comes around. And the new race, the Al Ra, which was added in Heavensward. So in retrospect, it was kind of an exciting MSQ patch, and we definitely were speculating a lot about the character that was teasing the Al Ra, Yugiri, because we didn't know what she was actually teasing, and of course seeing glimmers of a new job that was going to be on its way. Now, of course, we want to look at the major features that were added, and for someone like myself, there's no more major feature than raiding. Whereas we had the 24-man raid and the odd-numbered patch, this would establish the pattern of even-numbered patches being 8-man raids and odd-numbered patches being 24-man raids, because in patch 2.2, we would get the second coil of Bahamut turns 1 through 4. Now, these were drastically different than the first coil, which was kind of a disaster. Yeah, it was their first raid, so we cut them a bit of slack, but man, it did not hold up. It was buggy. It was taken down for months on end for the final fight. Whereas second coil had kind of a different set of issues. The encounters were way better designed, enjoyed a lot more, and you'll hear boomers like myself referring back to these raids as kind of a highlight of A Realm Reborn, specifically second coil itself. That being said, they were almost all of them, subject to cheese strats, as I like to call them. With Rafflesia, you could actually time a walkthrough to completely avoid its eating mechanic. On the Melusine fight, you could actually stack up all the adds and repeatedly petrify them to eliminate that mechanic from the fight entirely, or to just not have to worry about kiting adds anymore. And on the Avatar, for the stack markers, you could actually stack up all the players and just have maybe one player step in or no players do the mechanic at all. There were some other things you could do that made those fights go a little bit more smoothly, but even with all of that in mind, it's still a very beloved raid tier, something that will matter again when we talk about it in the patch 2.3 video. Of course, hardcore raiding isn't the only content that it had. It had all the usual stuff. First of all, 3 dungeons again. This was the pattern back then, but I believe it was the Lost City of Amdapor. Bro, it was definitely Brayflox. Yeah, yeah, it was definitely that. And the other one's going to play on the screen because like an idiot, I didn't write it down. But I think I had it remembered until I remembered Brayflox, because I've got memories of that one, that's for certain. And the 3 dungeon times, I mean, that's kind of a standard for A Realm Reborn. Something some people miss. I myself don't all that much. But the Lost City of Amdapor is one of my favorite dungeons that they added back in A Realm Reborn. So it's exciting to get to see it here implemented in patch 2.2. During the MSQ also, there was the new hard mode trial, and that of Leviathan, the World Eater. A fight that was kind of tipsy-turvy for some, both literally and figuratively. Some people liked it, some people didn't. It had some very unique rules, things that reduced your healing range, you know, only certain parts of the Leviathan being attackable by certain players or certain jobs because of reflecting damage back, and an ad phase that definitely caused a lot of issues. But it was still pretty enjoyable, and I'm mostly referring to things that happened with the extreme version, which was added in this same patch. Now, interestingly enough, this again isn't a norm, but A Realm Reborn had this more than frequently. They had a second EX trial in patch 2.2, and that was Thorn March Extreme. One of my least favorites they've ever done, and not because it's not conceptually cool either. I think the idea of what it wants to be is pretty good, but it just wasn't fun to do, wasn't satisfying for me. That being said, you can't ignore content is content, and having 2 EX trials in one patch was definitely something that players look forward to, even if one of them was Mogglmog. Also excitingly, patch 2.2 is the introduction of a long-standing staple that still occurs to this day, in that of extreme trial mounts. Now, patch 2.1 had the Nightmare mount, which was one mount that could drop from any of the 3 extreme trials from that patch. But now is when we got the individual per extreme trial mount. So a mount for Ifrit, a mount for Garuda, a mount for Leviathan. Obviously, Mogglmog kind of skipped that train, thank goodness. But all the same, this was the start of the EX trial mount farm. And long before we had the quality of life that we have nowadays. So that's something that still entertains me. I get all of my EX trial mounts. I farm them 50 times now that they've been giving us 2 totems each, or I just pray for it to drop and win it. But that's when it was implemented. 2.2, it's been around that long. Now, in terms of combat content, realistically, the only other important thing is 2 more beast tribes. The Sahagin and the Kobolds were introduced in patch 2.2. It was weird that they were just kind of like barreling through them, because we got 2 in 2.1 and 2 in 2.2. But the 2.2 ones I remember liking a lot better. The 2.1 beast tribes, I remember really not liking the way they were structured, even if I thought the quests themselves were kind of okay. But these ones were generally better received because they had taken feedback from the 2.1. So, you know, Sahagin and Kobolds, there's another. And, you know, looking at my list here, I say that's really the last piece of combat content, but there is one very important one that I kind of skipped over, because in my head it is combat content, but it's kind of just in its own playing field. The introduction of the Zodiac weapons. While we did have the relic weapons as carryovers from 2.0 with a quest series where you had to do a bunch of objectives to unlock a weapon, this was the beginning of the upgradable weapon series. The Zodiac weapon would go on to be updated in future patches with multiple different versions, and this sort of idea would carry itself expansion to expansion, which we'll see in the future videos with the Anima weapon, Resistance weapon, Eureka weapons, and now the Manderville weapons. This is why everyone calls the weapon series grinds relic weapon grinds, because it was the relic becoming the Zodiac weapon, and that's just kind of stuck from all the, once again, boomers that you have talking about the good old days. Now, Final Fantasy XIV, as we all know, is not all combat content, and there were some pretty major features that are not combat related that were added in patch 2.2. Looking at housing in particular, 2.1 was the introduction of housing, whereas 2.2 expanded things that you could do in housing. Now, some of them are really simple, like being able to put merchant shops in your actual house to hire the NPCs, but they also introduced free company crafting, which would go on to be something that you would use for a particular feature in 3.0. Now, I say crafting, but I don't think it was the actual workshop yet. It was like a type of crafting. I'd have to look back at it again, but I know that there was some sort of free company related crafting system that was added in patch 2.2. Funnily enough, patch 2.2 introduced the basement for housing. Yeah, your houses that have basements, that wasn't in there until 2.2. They just didn't have basements at that point, I suppose. And also gardening, that was introduced in patch 2.2 as well, and I'm sure many a person made many a gill off of that when it was first introduced. Another big piece of content that was added was big fishing. Yeah, big fishing, not much up my alley. Do ocean fishing nowadays, but wasn't really a big fisher, never have been, still am not. But a lot of people have spent a lot of time trying to collect all those big fish, and they have been around since patch 2.2. So that's going back quite a ways. It's kind of crazy to think of that being there. Oh boy. Some other things that were added as well: master recipes, retainer ventures. It's just all sorts of these like really simple things that were added. Oh my goodness. There's actually a whole list of things that I didn't even get to in my initial go through, other combat related stuff that I mentioned. But for some reason, I almost missed one of the most important things that patch 2.2 added. Maybe I should have saved it for last. And that of glamours. Yeah, glamours were added in that patch. patch. Now, granted, glamours have been vastly updated and upgraded since that day, but that was the beginning, the very beginning of the system, with just a prism and a piece of gear and no sort of what is it called, the thing. I don't actually use it for anything other than storage. I should really log in and check. All the functions and features we have nowadays, they all started here when it was barely a thing. So good to see that it's come such a long way since then. Also, the challenge log was introduced in patch 2.2. Man, that was such a good addition because leveling was still kind of slow back then. So when they introduced something that was new for leveling, it was a big deal. And the challenge log to this day, I think it's less of a big deal now. We have so many options, so much availability, but people would be lying to you if they said they didn't care about challenge log EXP, because it is definitely one of the things I recommend that newer players make sure they don't miss out on when they play. It just helps you get ahead, stay ahead, level alternate jobs. Just so many ways to optimize on that particular element. There are also new tomes. I mean, every even numbered patch has new tomes, so I almost skipped over that because new tomes, great, exciting, happy. But I mean, this was the first time we had new tomes, so that's kind of a big deal because it sets the precedent for, you know, pretty much the system they would use for every even numbered patch going forward. But tomes are tomes. They also changed the weekly reset time in 2.2. Apparently, it was something other than Tuesdays at 1 a.m. PDT. And I think it's PDT, meaning that this patch happened during daylight saving, and not PST, which, you know, is what it is 6 months out of the... I hate daylight saving. Just please get rid of it, for the love of God. There was also the free destination for the one-time password. So if you have the one-time password on your account, you can set a free destination. That was added in 2.2. Oh man, ground waymarks. So it's funny because in the patch notes itself, I couldn't find something mentioning the fact that waymarks were being added in patch 2.2. However, I went back and looked at some of my old videos. Did not see waymarks in the 2.0 and 2.1 fights that I was doing, and saw them in the 2.2 fights. Not to mention the /waymark command was added in patch 2.2. However, back then we had A, B, and C. I know I did 1, 2, and 3, but I wasn't going to make the letters with my hands. That's it. We had 3 waymarks. We had 3 waymarks, no presets. Times have sure improved, especially with this most recent patch. Oh man, I mentioned retainer ventures, I mentioned the challenge log, mentioned glamours. Oh, here's one I almost forgot. And this is really the last one. This is at the end of my list. Hildebrand continued in patch 2.2 from 2.1. But this was very particularly the introduction of Battle at Big Bridge. It's a trial that's exclusively part of the Hildebrand questline, and it was the thing that capstoned the end of the 2.2 trailer. They go to the name of the patch, fade to black, and then all of a sudden you hear that classic Final Fantasy V theme in Gilgamesh. Whoa! So that was a very hype way to cap off the 2.2 trailer. Now, there are a ton of other little things, a lot of resolved issues, a lot of known issues, and a lot of adjustments that they made to things like guild hests, such as implementing the first-time completion bonus per job and resetting the previous ones. I can hear Aloha meowing at me angrily, so I should probably wrap up this recording soon. Tons of leave quest changes in general, lots of reward adjustments. Obviously, with the new tomes, they had to cycle everything out, updates to treasure maps, crafting materials, things you could buy with Grand Company seals, furnishings being added. And of course, back then, our 2.2 patch notes had a list of every item. So we used to just get to see the item level of everything once the full patch notes had come out. So there's probably a bunch of other really little things that I bet a lot of you appreciate nowadays that were implemented back in patch 2.2. If you take a look at the patch notes for yourself and find something that I didn't mention, be sure to throw it in the comment section of the video below, because, well, it's exciting. And that's kind of the whole point of the series, is to look back at the olden days and see what it was like back then, and see what was hype and new, and what we just kind of have grown to appreciate but not really talk about nowadays. Anyway, that's going to be a wrap for my patch 2.2 retrospect. Thank you for watching this video. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. And as I'm sure you're aware, we have many more patches to go through, so you probably want to stick around. Anyway, I'll see you all in the next one, and until then, take care.